In this episode of Grief in Common, we talk about death and grief throughout. Hi, my name is Hayden and I'm a Winston's Wish Youth Ambassador. Today we're going to be talking about the stigma around males' bereavement. And today I'm here with Alfie from Race Across the World.
Hi everyone, it's Alfie from Race Across the World. Really good to be here on the Grief in Common podcast with Hayden. But yeah, I'm just kind of looking forward to chatting a little bit about it and trying to kind of beat that stigma that's been surrounding bereavement for a little bit too long.
Well, I think the first thing that we can probably talk about today is that stigma around mental health and males' bereavement. So I think one thing that I struggled with when my nan passed was talking about it, because I felt though I had to be this strong boy that I couldn't be affected by it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt the same.
If you don't mind me asking, how old were you when your nan passed away?
I think I was 14.
Yeah, so I think that's probably where I had it a little bit differently, because my mum passed away when I was 5. I obviously had the kind of more like emotionless child growing up, like everything. Well, as I say, emotionless, but like not kind of rational emotion. Everything was just like everything's up here when you're like a 5, 6, 7-year-old kid. I think when you're sort of 14, 15, you're starting to kind of understand life's pressures a little bit more and actually understand what it means that you never get to see anyone again. So I didn't necessarily feel that kind of that I needed to be strong initially. But I think that's just because of the age that it's happened. But what I absolutely have seen from other people is that is how people are expected to be dealing with it. And that's not just about grief, that's about mental health in general.
Yeah. I think with you being so young when your mum passed, how do you deal with that now? Do you find that quite hard?
The problem with grief is that regardless of how you take it emotionally, there is always, like, whether or not the fact that I'm over my mum emotionally, which I like to think that I now mostly am, like past the kind of like overthinking side of things, but there's still a reality every day that I'm left without my next of kin, which other people have. And that's the thing about grief that might not often be that talked about, is that regardless of how you actually process it emotionally, the fact remains that when somebody dies, they are absent from your life forever. And the fact that it doesn't affect me emotionally is irrelevant to the fact that I will never be able to have a mum, and that's the reality of it.
Yeah. And I think I can understand how hard that is for you to be able
Yeah.
to see everybody else around you and you growing up,
I guess that's the thing, is that, and that's probably another thing that people don't really talk about, is that, again, regardless of how you process it as a human being, it's an elephant in the room. It's like the one way that I never thought it would have to affect me is like even things like going into relationships. That I have to declare pretty early on into a relationship that like if we ever have children or anything like that, they're not going to have like a grandparent on the side, and that's a tough thing to kind of bring somebody else into straight away. And grief just, it visits you in so many different ways that you didn't think it would, even once you kind of processed the emotional side of it.
That really hits with the milestones as well. Like me, I've just completed my GCSEs, and that's something I had to understand I wasn't going to be able to speak to my nan about and be able to talk to her about. And starting college, that wasn't something that I was able to message her or call her, and she was so involved in things like that, and she wanted to know all about it. And that's something that I was never able to share with her, those memories that we make and those memories you're wanting to make. So it's all those things that then pile up, no matter how long ago someone might have passed. Every day it hits you differently.
Yeah, because it will be a different thing that you wish, it'll be a different moment you wish you could have shared with them. It's a different milestone that you've achieved that you wish you could tell them about. It's a different birthday that you wish you'd been there for, that they'd seen. Like every day chucks up a different part of your life that someone could have been a part of.
Yeah. I think it's also not really spoken about, like, the future memories that you'd make with the person, because I think when a person dies, you talk about the things that happened with them previously, but I don't think it is really spoken about much. Those plans, like, for me, my nan meeting my kids, And I've got a little sister who was born after my nan passed. Like my little sister's never going to get those memories of Christmas with my nan. Them things, I think, is also something that's really hard to comprehend.
As human beings, we want validation. Like that's a large part, just innately. Like that's just what we want as people, and it's really really hard to understand that, particularly when it's someone that, you know, finding genuine people that love and care about you is hard enough as it is, without having them like feel like they're taken away from you at such an early point, and kind of feeling like you've lost that validation from someone who really cared is challenging. And like you said, it's not just about like what happened, is about what is going to happen, and then what they're missing out on as well. Yeah, it absolutely is all of those things. It's like I've never been able to ask my parents about like work and things like that. You know, I've always had to ask someone advice from a generation even further up, which has meant that sometimes it's not been, and even then pragmatically and practically words, it becomes quite difficult. So
Yeah,
that's the hardest part, is that you just don't understand when it first happens, because you're so inundated with the emotion and the rawity of losing someone. You don't actually realize about how much it's going to hit you just at random points. And I think that's the hardest part.
yeah. And I mean, for you growing up, how did you kind of move through those milestones? How did you manage to cope with that, would you say?
This has been sort of my big message for a really long time, is that everyone deals with this very, very differently, and that's totally calm, and that's absolutely up to anyone how they want to. I started by dealing with it like very much how kind of, I guess, it's standard to, in the sense that when the anniversary rolled around, it was like, shut everything off, make no plans, we're going to sit and we're going to be sad. And for some people that works, and like reminiscing on memories and things like that. But I think when I hit sort of 13 or 14, I was just like, I can't be bothered. So I started actively making plans on the days that I struggled, because distraction was always my kind of form of good. If I could make sure that I was at a football match or something always on the day that she passed away, I genuinely wouldn't care. It would just feel like a normal day. So I think making the day a celebration rather than kind of like something to be sad about was important.
Yeah. And I think the distraction is a very big thing that I think I did as well. Like, I remember the day my nan passed, the next day I was out at another provision that I used to go to. And it was like, I was trying to keep myself as busy and distracted as possible, because I felt as though if I didn't actually accept what happened, it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
You know, I could wake up the next day and she was going to be there. But actually, I ended up realizing that the longer I keep myself distracted, the longer that I try not to accept this,
Yeah.
actually, the harder it's going to be in the long run to accept it. And I think that's why it had such a negative impact on my mental health, because I wasn't going to talk about it. I mean, it took me nearly 2 years to actually be like, okay, no, I'm ready to talk about this now, because I completely shut off from that emotion and that side of it, because I didn't want to. I didn't want to talk about it, because if I spoke about it, it made it real.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really kind of nice quote, is that if I spoke about it, it made it real, because there is a balance between like making sure that you're distracted and then also ignoring it, because at some point it's going to need to be processed. Again, like, it's human nature. Something like that, an event like that, means that it's going to need to sink in, and you're going to need to come to terms with the fact that however hard you distract yourself, or however hard you try and imagine otherwise, that person will not come back. It's really important to strike that balance between making sure that it doesn't completely ruin your life if possible, because, you know, life is too finite, and 99 times out of 100, the person that has died would not want you to feel like that. But that's easier said than done, and that's just a way of living. But I think, yeah, that balance is so important.
Yeah, and that was definitely always something that I thought about with what you just said about the person that passed wouldn't want you to be feeling the way you was. And that's definitely something that came to me a few years after she passed. And it was like, as much as I'm upset and I don't want to talk about it and I want to lock myself away, my nan wouldn't have wanted me to do that. My nan would have wanted me to move on and be happy and make such a credit to other people's lives. because that's the person she was. And that's why I think I went for the Winston's Wish Youth Ambassador, because my nan would have wanted me to take something that I really struggled with and use it to help others.
Yeah, and I think that's the best thing that can come out of something like that, is that if you can take that power and use it to direct it towards other people, that's the greatest way to use it. And how old are you? 16? I think it's absolutely remarkable to kind of step up to the plate and even come onto a podcast and talk about it and host a podcast. You know, like it's really impressive. I think it just shows how commendable you are, and I think probably from what you're saying, how far you've come on that journey, which just shows to other people that it is possible.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we both have in common with it as well was your mum, the first person that you lost that was close to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my nan was the first person I lost. Obviously, being different ages, it might have hit us differently. But I think when you lose someone for the first time, you don't know how to react to it. You don't know how to deal with it. And me being a 14-year-old boy, didn't want to talk about it. I really saw that have an impact on my behaviours as well that I showed.
Yeah.
And my anxiety got so much more worse, and my depression, and like my anger as well. I got so angry, and I was so angry at the world for taking this person away from me that I love so dearly. I mean, my nan was someone I saw pretty much every day. She picked me up from school because my dad was at work and my mum don't drive. She used to pick me up, so she'd be the first person I talked to if there was any issues at school. She'd be the one that I talked to about my day, and that for me was really hard to be like, I'm never going to get that.
Yeah, and that's because that's no different to when you've got that kind of, when you forge that kind of relationship, it that's just the equivalent of losing a parent. Like there's no two ways about it. And I think we're both kind of mature enough to say that that's probably, your nan and my mum aren't going to be the last time in our lives that we're going to lose someone. And that first one is always difficult. And you know, I think about how I'm going to react when my nan passes away, because she's the one who's now looked after me for 21 years, and you know, she hasn't got a million years to live. So you know, you start thinking about how that one's going to go. And look, I've got full confidence in myself because I feel like I've overcome all the barriers that I'd needed to. But it's still hard, because now you always worry about other people as well. It's
Yeah.
it's all those different angles.
No, definitely, because I think after my nan passed, it was definitely a couple months later, I was there thinking, like, who's next then? I was constantly thinking about my granddads and my other nan, and when you lose someone and you are worried about losing someone again, I think that really then has another detrimental impact.
What do you think was, so obviously you said that for 2 years you kind of shut yourself off, or so what was kind of, was there a turning point, or was it just a case of, in your case, time was just a bit of a healer?
I think for me it was a breaking point. So I was in bed one night and I was just crying so much, and it was the next day that I spoke to my mum and I was like, I need some help now. A year and a half down the line, I was like, oh yeah, I'll be able to deal with it still.
Yeah.
And I thought, if, like I said, if I pushed it to the back of my head, it wasn't going to be something that would be able to come back. But actually, you push it back and back and back, and it comes back faster and it comes back harder. And I remember being like, no, I need help, because if I don't have help, I'm going to be in a really bad place.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in a place where all I was thinking was, I want to be with my nan. That was the time I needed help.
And what did that support look like?
So I started having my sessions with Winston's Wish once a week. And I think I had 6 or 7 sessions with them. And it all just started by just talking about my nan, talking about how I've kind of felt about it. One thing that I really struggled with is how I grieved so differently to other people. And I know everybody grieves differently. But one thing I really struggled with was with my autism, how I grieved, because someone would tell me something, but I'm very black and white. I'm not able to see it that way. So
Yeah.
when someone was telling me, oh, that's a sign, I struggled to believe that. Having younger siblings as well who didn't really understand what had happened, they're like telling me that there's a sign, and I'm trying to believe it for them, but I couldn't. So that was one thing that our sessions looked like. And then it was talking about the memories that I'm not going to be able to make with my nan, and things that are going to happen that I'm not going to be able to speak to my nan about. And we spoke about the ways that I cope. So I message my nan's number quite often, just to kind of tell her what's happening. And as much as I knew she was never going to respond, in my head I was like, no, she can respond. As much as I knew she couldn't, I really wanted to believe that she would. And that was one thing we spoke about in the sessions, because as much as I thought that helped me, it didn't.
Yeah.
Every time I didn't get a response, it made it so much more harder in my head.
Yeah, and I think it's seeing the physical signs. I mean, my nan still really struggled. Like we we have arguments. I'm not joking. There is a wardrobe in this house full of my mum's clothes, and I am trying to get rid of them. Not get rid of them, but I'm trying to at least move them out the wardrobe. And my nan is like, nope, they are staying there. We have this argument on a weekly basis because they are getting in the way. But it's that thing, isn't it? Like, it's if I leave them there, she might wear them one day. Like, she still might. And it's that exact same thought process of just leaving little bits of people around in the hope that one day they just pick them up, or they'll walk back through the door and things like that. And for a lot of people, that's what keeps them going. But I personally think it's a really, really dangerous game to play with your own head. If it works for some people, that's great, but I could never personally do it like that.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, around that too, when I go and visit my granddad at where him and my nan lived, and I go into the house, I'll look into the bedroom and I expect to see her laid there on the bed, eating a chocolate eclair or doing something. And when she's not there, it makes it more real. But because I'm expecting to see her, it makes it so much more harder when you don't. I don't really go to the house often because when I go there, it reminds me that she's not here.
Yeah. So there is still very much that element of kind of trying to push it to the back of your head in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be honest, I don't know if time is a healer or not, because I don't think what's happened to me can kind of be compared to anyone else, because I was so young and because my family structure was really, really strange. Like, usually there'd still be a dad on the scene, or, there'd be at least one set of grandparents, and mine just wasn't like that at all. But I think time might have been a healer for me, but it's hard to tell because you don't actually know. Like, the horrible thing about your brain is that you don't actually know why it's doing what it's doing. It just does it for you. Nothing you can do about it.
No, definitely. And I think when someone says time of the healer, I think either it is or it isn't for someone,
Yeah, and it's such a lazy statement to say, really, because it won't just be time that heals the pain. Like, the time getting longer and, your brain more coming to terms with the fact, or your brain being able to enjoy life without that person. That's not time. That's just development. And sometimes that process takes longer for some people. Sometimes it doesn't. It's such a lazy thing for people to kind of chuck out, especially when people say to people that are grieving, it's like, time will help. No one.
And talking about things that, like, I don't really think helped when I was grieving. And it was like when people would say to me, she's in a better place now, or, oh, she's okay, she's not in pain. And I found that so hard, because actually the best place for her to be was here with her family.
Yeah.
When someone said, oh, she's not in pain anymore, I kind of felt selfish in a way because,
Yeah, because now I'm in pain.
yeah, and
Yeah,
I didn't want to be in pain as much as I didn't want my nan to be in pain. I didn't want to be in pain either.
yeah. And it's hard because particularly for young people, like when you're in a school environment, mm, kids don't know what to say at the best of times. Never mind like when it's something on that scale. And I don't think anyone ever means anything by it, but it is just things like that that are just really unhelpful. And just trying to keep your cool, especially if you're struggling, like keeping your cool in those situations is really hard as well. And people are just trying to help. Even some of your closest friends will get things like that wrong. Once you had sort of even during the time when you were processing it, did you have any of these conversations with like your mates, or whatever environment you were in? Was that something that you spoke about, or was it really something that you just pushed as far away as possible?
So I tried to push it away as far as possible. I felt like I had to be this strong person, and I really didn't feel like I could talk about it. I mean, even my mates, as much as I felt like I could talk to them, I also knew they wouldn't know how to talk back,
Yeah, yeah.
which is obviously no fault of their own. But
Do you think they knew? Do you think they knew that something? Do you think they knew that something was up? Like, obviously they knew that your nana passed away and things like that. But did they know that it was I guess as bad as it was?
definitely not. I was so good at hiding my emotions when I was out. I could
Yeah,
mask it so well. And I think that's why I felt so mentally drained as well, because I would go out and I would have the biggest smile on my face, and, I could talk about anything, and I would take on everybody else's issues to make them forget about mine, and to make them forget that my nan's just passed away, and to make them forget about asking if I'm okay. I'd make sure that I was there for everyone, so no one was there for me.
yeah,
Same with like support workers, support staff that I had around me. If they would ask me a question, I'd completely flip it. How have you been? Oh yeah, I've been fine. How have you been? How's this been? Have you done anything recently? I'd completely change the topic so they wasn't able to ask me. I really felt as though there was no one around me that I could trust, because in a way I felt like I've just lost someone I can trust. There's now no one around me that I can trust because they can leave just as easy.
yeah. I think that's so. What were your kind of outlets then, if any?
I just slept a lot. I was trying to avoid the world as much as possible. I don't actually think I had many outlets. One thing I did do, so a couple months before my nan passed away, I started football coaching.
Yeah,
And that's one thing that I still do now. And I've continued to do throughout the whole process. And I think for me, that was kind of a beneficial thing, because I took my hurt and really fueled it into my football coaching. I see that now still has such a positive effect, because I see these players that I'm coaching and I can see the way they're developing and the way they're getting better from what I'm doing. And I think that helped me so much during the time when I felt like I had no help and I couldn't have no help. I could see myself helping other people actively.
yeah,
Sports is definitely something that helps mental health. Being active definitely helps. And I think doing football coaching was definitely something that has helped me so much, not even just mentally, but to get my foot indoors, because, I've now got qualifications.
definitely. It's always hard to say, like, what your outlet, because there isn't really such thing as as like it's something that will completely take your mind off it. But it's still, I think it's still really, really important that even in your darkest moments that you still try and keep what you're passionate about,
Yeah.
because if you lose that, then you really do lose virtually everything.
Yeah.
Because if I know that if I didn't find my passions and things like that, then it would, you just do really struggle to find kind of like a sense to keep going.
You do lose yourself in that situation, if you forget about everything else, if you are in a position where you're just alone, you're not going out, you do lose yourself And I felt like I lost a lot of my self-esteem and my self-worth because I felt like there was nothing there for me anymore because I locked myself
Yeah.
away from people for so long. I lost so many friendships and I was such a bad friend to other people because I didn't want to even bother with people because of how I felt.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, on that, sorry to cut you off. Just interestingly on that, how have you found it rebuilding from that? Because, like, and this is what's interesting to me is that I kind of started my bounce back at a similar age to you now. When I was 16, I sort of just thought like, Jesus, this isn't working. Let's just like try and
Yeah.
get something going. How are you finding the bounce back? Because obviously we're still talking for you like a very, I'm 21, so I can look back on kind of the last 5 years and say, yeah, I executed X, Y, Z really well. I didn't do that very well. You're kind of still in the middle of that. So how do you feel like the bounce back from those moments is going?
I mean, for me, I was in a situation where I just lost someone. I wasn't at school, so I didn't actually have many mates. And those mates I did have, I've completely pushed away.
Yeah.
So I've only just begun that bounce back in, I'd say, July, when I actually started opening up, when I became an ambassador. That's only started for me recently. And me agreeing to go to college and me making these friendships with people, I do struggle with it, you know, I do struggle socially now, but I find it that I'm finding my self-worth again, having to rebuild that. And I find that so rewarding for myself. I can see the progress I'm making for myself. And in the back of my head, I'm like, my nan would be proud of this. My nan would be proud of me in this situation. It's a long road. And I think along that road, you make a lot of stops. And I think those stops get further and further and further, but each stop is hard.
Yeah, and like looking back at like how it'd be so easy for someone to kind of look at where I was when I was 15 and look at where I am now and go, bloody hell, like you've turned that around. Like, yeah, kind of, but also not not without its like issues. Like you will think you're on the clearest road in the world, and then something will just halt you back. And the fact that you are still so kind of early on that journey, so to speak, and like I said, to have the confidence and kind of speak so openly about it, I think it's really, really commendable. Yeah, it is a long journey, and I think to anyone who might listen and feel like they're also on that journey or they haven't even started that journey yet, it is hard and it is long, and it took me sort of 4.5 years to get my act back together, and in many ways I still haven't got it together. So
Yeah.
life's hard enough without other challenges on top of it, and going through something like this puts you at a setback, and it absolutely does. But it's just about moving at your own pace, and it sounds like you're doing that really well.
Yeah. And I think as well with that bounce back that me and you have both had, I think when you see how you started it compared to now, like even me a couple months down the line, I can see how much of a different person I am. And I'm proud of that. I can only think of how proud you should be of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm problematic to myself in the sense that I'm never doing enough. Like even now, there's way too much that I need to be doing. And for me, it's always about building. But yeah, compared to how I was when I was 16, and compared to the way that I was feeling about myself and the way that I behaved around other people, like I'm very, very happy night and day with how it's gone.
That's such a great thing for us to be able to see ourselves. And I think it's really nice when someone else says to you, oh, I can see you've made such a difference, or I can see how much progress you've made. But I think when you can see it within yourself, I think it's so much more of a rewarding experience for you.
Yeah, I think everyone means the loveliest thing by it. But when people say to me, like, your mum would be so proud of you, it's like, that's great. And I love that. But my question is, am I proud of myself, or is the person that I was when I started this journey proud of who I am now? That almost to me is the much bigger question, because the thing about the people that love you is that the reality is that they will be proud of you virtually regardless. And that's why losing them is so hard, because again, comes back to that validation thing. They will be proud of you and they will love you, whether you're objectively successful or not. And I think only you intrinsically know when you've truly made yourself proud.
So today we've spoken about the stigma around men's grieving, and we've also spoken about men's mental health and other things surrounding grief. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for having me, Hayden. Really, really appreciate it. If you are a young person struggling, and then you can go to the Winston's Wish website and get all the support you need. You've been listening to Grief in Common. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Talk Grief, powered by Winston's Wish, the UK's first children and young people's bereavement charity.
Listen to young people from different backgrounds have honest conversations about their grief and experiences.
You might hear us laugh, cry, and everything in between.
We hope that these conversations give you the confidence to talk about your own grief. If you're grieving and over the age of 13, this podcast is suitable for you, and we hope it helps you feel less alone.
From teenagers to young adults, students to young professionals, we're all different, but we've all got grief in common. Thank you.